So
Sarita?
I'm sure all of you know Dr. Raj Vedam. I think most of you all attended his talk yesterday. Yes. And for those who don't know, I'm sure you would have seen his talks online. You would have read about him. Yesterday, the only words that came to my mind after his talk were astounding, awesome, amazing, shattered, flattered, all the emotions, all the feelings associated with the Adbhuta Rasa, as we call it. So I hope to see more of that today. And I'm a daughter of a history professor. I'm an electrical engineer. I have a combination of that as well, but history never interested me as a child, thanks to our textbooks. But your history really, really amazes me, especially the astronomy of it. And I look forward to learn a lot more and teach that to our children. That's what matters to me. So with this, I please welcome you, sir, on the stage and carry on. Please astound us much more.
Thank you. Thank you. So once again, Swamiji, your blessings. And I'd like to thank the audience once again today for sitting on this wonderful Monday afternoon after a nice lunch. So I hope I don't put you all to sleep. So yesterday, I don't know how many came for yesterday's talk. There's going to be some overlap with yesterday's talk. So I might race through the overlap sections. I don't want to waste your time. So my apologies if there are some new people in the audience who don't understand that too well over there. In contrast with yesterday's talk was very upbeat, it was very positive, but the nature of this topic is such that it's going to be negative sometimes. So the narrative is going to be negative. It's only a consequence of this. So I'm going to be talking about the untold history of India. So the name itself is provocative. It says that there is something that the textbooks don't teach us, and we'll try to see evidence for this over here. So once again, this is the group that I work with, Indian History Awareness and Research. We are based in Houston, Bengaluru, Coimbatore, Columbus, Pune, and Chennai. You can find our works on iHeart channel on YouTube. So I'd like to set the stage for my talk by pointing out a few issues with our history. The first is that we have a continuity of our civilization for a very long time. However, in our textbooks, we have an enforced periodization. We are told first there was somebody called Indus Valley Civilization. We don't know anything about their language. We don't know what they ate, how they looked, what they spoke. We don't know their script. We know nothing about them, an isolated group of people there. Afterwards, the Aryans came into India, and you had the Hinduism and these kind of things. So we have an enforced periodization. We have very large periods of history, but I'll show to you that we have erased a lot of our history out of our textbooks. This is what really should strike all of us. We have accounts of hundreds of rishis who have created so many works, so many hundreds and thousands of works in the Indic context. But you see, your textbooks don't mention the name of a single rishi, of a single textbook, their book they're written. Is it not part of our heritage? Is it not part of our history? Do you see the irony of what is happening in our country? We have erased a lot of things, and I'll show much more proof for this later on. Here's part two of that. Like I said, we are an ancient civilization, but positioned otherwise. We have been knowledge producers for an exceedingly long period of time. But we are told that your knowledge came from Greece, your knowledge came from Babylon, your knowledge came from Egypt. This is what we are told in our textbooks. Like I said, we have very strong Indic sources and references, but these are ignored, devalued, and discredited. The minute you say that I have some Indic text that I like to work with, people first thing say we are a secular country. So you have completely ignored it, or you have devalued it, or you have discredited it. Many of you might know Bhairappa, very famous son of Karnataka. If you Google for Bhairappa NCERT, you'll find the crux of what is happening over here. Bhairappa was in the NCERT textbook committee, and he asked his chairman, why are the textbooks the way they are? There are so many obvious errors, mistakes, and so on. This is what he was told. To preempt a supposed Hindu jingoism, The Indus Valley civilization was disconnected from India, and Hindus were made invaders or migrants to this nation in 1500 BC. The idea was, if you say that the minorities are all new immigrants, so are you. You're also an immigrant. That was the idea. They wanted to do that. To preempt state rivalries, a central narrative favored the rich state narratives of history. The minority sentiments are privileged, invasive periods of Indian history is whitewashed, and imagined atrocities of Indic rulers is manufactured. We ourselves saw that when we were reviewing the textbooks for a particular state in India. I saw that in the 7th grade textbooks, for Ghazni, they had one short paragraph saying he took the riches of India and built a splendid capital in Ghaznavi. In other words, even out of negativisms, they put some positivisms over there. Whereas the following 4 or 5 paragraphs were about Hindu rulers who are supposed to have destroyed temples and taken idols and murtis and so on, completely without specifics. That just gives you an idea of what is happening in NCERT textbooks. To promote Marxist values, a deliberate Hindu-phobic narrative is made. So there is no mention of anything about the civilization of this country from thousands of years. If they want to talk about your civilization, it is in the context of caste, cow worship, sati or child marriage or gender issues and things like that. So in the United States, when we reviewed the textbooks for Texas, so we wrote back to them saying, if I write about Christianity, and the only thing I say about Christianity is that in Christianity they burnt women as witches. Christianity practiced slavery because they believed God gave them permission to do slavery. Christianity did so many more atrocities, and that's all I say. I don't say anything about what Christ is supposed to have said. I don't say anything about Sermon on Mount or any such thing. I leave all the positives out and only show the negative. The publishers understood it very well. They said, yes, this is what we've done to Hinduism. There's no positive anywhere. But unfortunately, if you read the textbooks that your children are using, so you'll observe that your children's textbooks have got a very Hindu-phobic narrative, and it's up to you as parents to rise up and protest and write to or your chairmen of whatever textbook boards and so on and ask these obvious things to you. Is this Hinduism? And why are you telling these things? Is there nothing more to talk about? So distortions, erasures, biases, errors, misrepresentation are the hallmark of the current narrative, NCERT, state textbooks, everything has got that. So we cannot build national identity with such distortions, unfortunately. This is where we are. To give you the motivation for today's talk, we are told that Indian culture impacted all the lands to the north, to the south, to the east, whether it is Cambodia, Japan, or Southeast Asia. Indian culture, Buddhism has impacted all these guys. However, it did not step 1 foot outside Afghanistan. So this is what we are told in one more of those ridiculous situations. Unless you think about it, you don't see that you have been force-fed some lies, and we need to uncover some of these things. We are also told that we are told that the Hindu social order is blamed for poverty. So if you were to see the textbooks, they say that the caste system imposed on people, kept the people where they are, and so poverty today in India is because of them. We will show that invasions are the ones that created poverty and not the Hindu social order. We know that Indian knowledge seeded the world, but we are told we got knowledge from Greeks and Babylonians. We see no distinction between northern and southern Indians. However, today you have manufactured identities. Something called Dravidian has been manufactured. Something called Aryan has been manufactured. We'll go to the roots of these things and examine these things. This is Professor Subhash Kak. So he has written the rebuttal, and he says that there's no record of any language except Sanskrit if you go beyond 2000 BCE. The Rig Veda talks of Sanskrit going from the Saraswati going from mountain to sea. However, the river dried up in 2000 BCE. Why is that important? That is important because we are told Aryans came to India 1500 BCE, and then they wrote the Rig Veda and other such things. However, the Rig Veda is talking of Saraswati flowing from mountain to the sea. How is it possible they have seen a river if it dried up in 2000 BCE? according to the geological records. So there are problems over there. So we'll talk about some of these things a little later. As one, I'll ignore this also for now, ignore this for now. So bottom line, the mainstream narrative says we had Aryan invasion theory. The evidence-based narrative, which I'm going to show to you, will show that there's an out-of-India theory. We are told Indic thought only impacted the East, we'll show it impacted East and West. They say Indic civilization is recent, we'll show it as ancient. They say it borrowed from the Greeks and Babylonians, we'll show that Indian thought seeded the Greeks and Babylonians. We are told Vedic culture is responsible for widespread poverty, we'll show that is not true. It's the invasions that are responsible for that. Whenever we start a problem, we have to go to the root of the problem. Where did this problem start? For centuries, Indians were happy with the Itihasas, the Puranas, and this is our understanding of our history. That has been good enough. Every place has got a Sthala Purana. If you go to the temple, you'll find epigraphy that tells you what is the history of that place. That has been good enough for us Indians for a long time. However, when the British came to India, especially during the East India Company, they were very interested in knowing the history of this country they're trying to rule. So they commissioned some people to write the history of India, and one of them was this person, William Jones, in this time frame. So he was a person who was a scholar of Greek and Latin, and he came to India and he learned Sanskrit, and he was shocked. Why was he shocked? Because there was commonality between Greek, Latin, and Sanskrit. And he was wondering, how is this possible? Maybe they were all the same people, Aryans at some point. That's why these languages are related. So he started the idea of Aryan invasion theory, and a lot of things that he did later on have a bearing on our current history. One of the things that he did was, the Western historians could not make out any sense out of Indian history, because Indian history was showing great antiquity. Whereas all the guys from from Britain of that time, they were products of the Anglican Church. The Anglican Church taught them that God created the world in 4004 BCE. How did they come to that date? Because they started seeing this person, who was the son of which person, son of which person, son of which person, that's mentioned in the Old Testament. So they added up all the genealogy of the prophets and said Adam and Eve was created in 4004 BCE and so on. That's how they came to that date. Further, they believed that God destroyed the world in Noah's flood in 3000 BCE, and nothing could have survived that flood. So you cannot have a history which goes back beyond 3000 BCE. So when they encountered Indian Puranic accounts showing great antiquity, yesterday I hinted some of those things in the talk, today I will revisit again. They said, we can't take this. It's either some problem or so on. And I put some quotations over here. William Jones said, either the first 11 chapters of Genesis are true, or the whole fabric of our national religion is false. This was in response to their confronting Indian history going back to 8000 BCE, 9000 BCE, and so on. They're thinking, they were people from the Anglican Church. An educated man in that era could not think of anything else. So the God had created the world 4000 BC, destroyed it in 3000 BC. How can you have a history going there? So they said that all of Indian history is false. They tried to say that it is a white man's burden to go and correct the problems in Indian chronology. So they started correcting everything in our history. So that is where the set of problems started. William Jones also said, I'm obliged, of course, to believe the sanctity of the venerable books of the Genesis in this particular publication. Max Muller, he said, I look upon the creation given in Genesis as simply historical. So these were the guys, and this is the psychology of these guys, the mindset of these guys who wrote the history of India. And this is the history of India that all of us have unfortunately been force-fed in our textbooks till the current times. So these guys, what they wanted to do was, they have got an Indian history going back to such an enormous amount of time, but they don't know how it relates to Western history. So they were trying to see where is the synchronous point? Where can I anchor Indian history on something in Western history? Then in the Greek records, they found that there was somebody called Sandrakottos. Sandrakottos was an Indian emperor which the Greeks had visited. So they looked at the Puranic accounts. Puranas have got a king list starting from the grandson of Pandavas all the way to the Gupta kings. There is a king list, unbroken king list. Over there, they found a Chandragupta Maurya, and they said, Chandragupta Maurya is close Sandrakutus, and they said that is the equivalence. But by doing that, they introduced distortions, because in the Puranic account, Chandragupta Maurya was somewhere around 1200 BCE and earlier, whereas the Greek visits to India were 300 BCE. So they erased about 1,000 years of history by doing that. Till the British came, Indian history was perfectly in synchronism with the Puranic king list, Nepal king list, Sri Lankan king list, perfectly synchronized, no problem. But after the British finished what they did, synchrony was lost. Even till today, we have all kinds of issues in Indian history, dating of people and so on. So this is the roots of the colonial ideological offensive on India. So I'm going to examine the evidence with some of these fields, and that's what we're going to do. I'm going to ask these questions. Is the Aryan invasion migration theory valid? How ancient is the Indian civilization? What did the ancient Indians know? Was India a source of sink for knowledge? And we'll talk about the absurdity of the textbooks in each of these areas. So I'd like to define to you what the problem is. What is the Aryan invasion theory? This one says bands of male warriors from Central Asia invaded or migrated to India around 1500 BCE. Every word here is important. Every word here is important. Band, male, warriors, Central Asia invaded, migrated 1500 BCE. Because the ideological battle is hinged on all these things. So we are told that a bunch of men did not come in a big wave, but they came little by little, but they left their women behind. How? We know from the genetics. When I talk about genetics, we'll talk about, these kind of things. They left the women behind, only the men came to India and displaced the entire civilization. Was completely displaced. That's what it says. It replaced them, and they brought an entirely new Vedic religion, Sanskrit and Vedic ecosystem. This Aryan invasion theory we think it only impacts Indians, but that's not a true statement. Ever since William Jones found the commonality of Latin, Sanskrit, and Greek, the Western people would like to know, who are they? Who are they as a people? So in order to answer who the Western people are, first you must answer who are the Indians. Once you answer who the Indians are, then you can say who the Westerners are. So today, Aryan invasion theory has become a very big issue. It is rooted in the quest for the Western identity. So ever since William Jones found the commonality of these languages, they started using language as the basis for understanding who are you as a people, based on language ideas. So if they suspect there is a relationship between 10 languages, let us say you suspect relationship between Telugu, Tamil, Malayalam, Kannada, so you will take 100 words in each language, and you'll see how does a word change from one language to other, how is it changing, and you have a statistical measure of distance. Then you can say that on the average, this language is so close to this language, so far away some other language. Using those ideas, they reconstructed a mythical, hypothesized ancestor language. There's no evidence of anybody having spoken Proto-Indo-European, but they said, let there be an ancestor language. All the present day languages are descended from that ancestral language. So this is the ideology they brought about. So they put Balto-Slavic, Germanic, Celtic, Italic, Hellenic, Indo-Iranian, Iranian, and Sanskrit comes over here with all these languages over here. So this is the methodology they came about with, and there's a lot of criticism on these things because it's not a very accurate way of looking at the world. So people said, why don't we try to see if there's any archaeological support for this? Let's go and look for archaeology. Maybe if there's some support, then we can say linguistics and archaeology are telling these things. So today there are two main narratives, modern narratives. So one of them is by this lady called Maria Gimbutas. She brought about the Kurgan or the steppe hypothesis. She said this language, Indo-European language expansion, happened in 3 waves from steppes. Steppes is in Central Asia. From there, ever since they domesticated the horse, they were able to go around on the horse, invention of iron and all those things, from 4000 BCE to 1500 BCE. On the other side, this is Professor Colin Renfrew in 1987, Cambridge University. He proposed something called Anatolian hypothesis. Anatolia is Turkey. He said when agriculture was invented in Turkey and the export of agriculture to the rest of the world was the reason why language also went to the rest of the world. So that was his idea. So today some people say genetics favors Kurgan hypothesis, and also 6500 BC is too old for any linguistic analysis. Why is that? Linguistic analysis today is done by mathematical methods, statistical methods. They have an assumed rate of change of a word from one language to another. How quickly can it change? These are all statistical measures. These models are only valid for a certain amount of time. You can't push it too far behind because you don't have the data. Maybe 3,000 years, 4,000 years, that's all you can work with these models. So this is too old for any of these analysis. So this graphic very quickly tells you about the Kurgan or the Steppe hypothesis. So this is the Caspian Sea and this is the Black Sea. So this is Russia over here. So they hypothesized that there were a people here called the Yamnaya culture. It's a hypothesis that Yamnaya people lived here around 3500 BC. But at the same period of time, we had Harappa, Birana, Mehgar, Bhimbetka, Lothal, Edakal. We had people all over the place. It's not as if the story of civilization. Civilization already existed in India, in Sumeria, Egypt, and other places. We had civilization. So this is only the story of who are the so-called Aryans and the so-called ancestor of Western people. This is only that story. So by 2500 BC, these people have come to the west and become the corded ware people, and to the east becoming the Andernovo people. Here you see Indus Valley, Elamites, Sumerians. By 1500 BC, they become Hittites, Mycenaeans, Babylonians. And here you see somebody called Bactria Margiana Archaeological Complex, BMAC. And it has entered over here into Sindh, Gujarat. This is the beginning of Aryan invasion theory for us. Okay? And by the time we come to 500 BCE, they have become in the Ganga plain, they have entrenched themselves. And you see the appearance of a people called Dravidian in the record over here. Okay? So there's no Dravidian earlier, but now you see there's something called Dravidian that has come in 500 BCE. So this is the Aryan invasion theory, the way your children learn it and the way they're told us who we are. So we're going to validate all of these things and see if it makes sense. So at first, I'd like to examine the evidence using archaeology. I'd like to use archaeology as a tool to try and say how ancient is the human existence in India. What does archaeology tell us? Can anybody guess how ancient Indians might be in India? Anybody? 10,000 years? Before 10,000 years, okay. 15,000? Okay. Okay, let's start. How about 1 million years ago? This is a paper from Science. Science is a very renowned journal. You're in the Shabda Pramana of science now. So this researcher called Shanti Pappu, she wrote this paper in March 2011. And they found tools in Tamil Nadu, which they have dated to 1 million years ago. How do they know the date of the rocks they get out of the soil? They use a scientific method called luminescence. What is luminescence? If there is a rock that is under the soil, for centuries and centuries, there is a natural radioactivity of the earth, right? Natural radioactivity of the earth. So this rock keeps accumulating charge. It keeps accumulating a charge. When you take it out of the soil, like archaeologists dug it out, right? So when you take it out of the soil, when you expose it to sunlight and atmosphere, it starts giving away the extra charge. The extra charge goes away. So you can calibrate this in a laboratory, and you can try and see what is the rate of discharge of this charge. You can say how old this specimen is. That is a scientific method people use to figure out how old things are. And in this paper, they have dated this to 1 million years ago. Here is a tool 1 million years ago. This is a tool that is now in the National Museum in Haryana. If you go to Haryana and look at the museum, you'll find this because it comes from the Bias Valley from there. 1 million years ago, who was the species living in India? That is the question. Today, scientists say that the species was not Homo sapien, but it was a different species called Homo erectus. And this is an artistic reconstruction of what the Homo erectus might have looked like. So the Homo erectus is a timeline of the human race the way science is telling us today. It's not as if it's absolute fact. This is what the evidence is telling us today. Tomorrow, evidence might change. But from 10 million years ago, we have had different species of humans, and Homo erectus is here, 2 million years to about 600,000 years. Science tells us today that Homo erectus became extinct throughout the world 600,000 years ago. We as Homo sapiens are here about 150,000 years ago, just to give you an idea where it is. So the Homo erectus is known to have lived in social groups, used fire. The cranial capacity, brain capacity, was up to 1,100 cubic centimeters. In contrast, the modern human is about 1,400, 1,500 cc. That is a modern human. They used stone tools, about 70 kilograms, about 6 feet tall. They lived mostly in Africa, but you can see also India. All over India they lived, and also some parts of Southeast China. Now, something strange happened very recently. Just this year, in March, this paper came out once again in one of the scientific journals. In Athirampakam, in Tamil Nadu, they uncovered the tools of a species that lived there 350,000 years ago. So science has told us Homo erectus died out 600,000 years ago, but now they found the tools 350,000 years ago, and so we need to reframe certain things that come over here. So these are the examples of these tools. Now, in archaeology, they identify two kinds of tools. One kind of tool is bulk tool. Bulk tool means you use your hand like this. You take a rock and throw it at something. That's a bulk tool. A precision tool is something where you hold it with your thumb and your little finger and you keep working at it to make it sharper and sharper. They are small. Precision tool. Precision tool is identified with bigger brain capacity, modern humans. All these tools are precision tools. So the question is, who is the species that made that? That is an open question. Nobody knows even today. This is very, very recent research that has brought this out. I'd like to show you one specimen called Narmada Man. Narmada Man was uncovered in 1982 by Dr. Arun Sonakia of GSI. It's about 300,000 years old. So the French investigator, he measured the cranial capacity up to 1,400 cc. 1,400 cc is now modern human. And the average for Homo erectus from Asia, China, and Africa is around 1,000 cubic centimeters. So this American professor, he said that this species has to be assigned as early Homo sapien. So here we are. In the next few slides, I'll show you when we go to genetics that people assume human beings, the modern human being, Homo sapien, came into India about 80,000 years ago. That is what we are told. However, archaeology is now showing some strange things. It doesn't match well with the genetic record. At least over here, it seems to show that there's a continuum from a very early species called Homo erectus to Homo sapien. There's a continuum, and we may not be able to say this is the break-off point, Homo erectus, Homo sapien. It may not be possible. This is archaeology in India from 40,000 years ago. The species is Homo sapien. Homo sapiens are made. So wherever you look in India, all over, whether it's in the Soan Valley, the Beas Valley, the Narmada Valley, wherever you go, we find implements used by early humans. 35,000 years ago, Jwalapuram rock shelter. This is from a paper, Antiquity in 2009. You have several artifacts coming in from there. This is where it is, near Kurnool. Some more artifacts. This is from Bhimbetka in Madhya Pradesh, 35,000 years ago. You got rock art showing even a horse and a rider over here. Kerala, 9,000 years ago, Edakal caves, you have something that looks like writing in that. And what is more exciting is, there is a symbol that is in Kerala that is common with the symbol in Harappa, a man with a jar. That jar is there in Edakal. That same symbol is also there in Harappa. So leading people to speculate today, could there have been a connection? People are also saying this is an example of early writing. Why is it significant? Because we are told writing started in Sumeria around 3,500 BCE and so on, but this appears to be early writing 9,000 years ago. Ketavaram, Andhra Pradesh, Birhana, we know urban finds around 10,000 years ago, Rakhighari, as well as Ramachandrapuram, Telangana, 12,000 years ago. Here is from a paper in ASI in 2008. These are all the artifacts they uncovered from 2,700 years before now, before present, all the way to 9,400 years before present, some of the artifacts they found over there. This is very recent, less than 2 months ago, 2 or 3 months ago. A bunch of enthusiasts, they took a drone. You know what a drone is, right? A drone helicopter. They put a video camera on it. Is there a sound coming from this? So they equipped it with a video camera and sent it off in Maharashtra to take a picture of the landscape. And to their amazement, they found all these art on the floor. These are so huge that when you're walking, you can't make out. But when you go from the air and see it, the perspective, you can see it then. That's what it is. So they found these markings on the floor, and the archaeologists tentatively have said it is greater than 10,000 years old. This is from a paper in Episodes in 2003, and these researchers are from National Institute of Ocean Technology in Chennai. So what they did is, they took a ship and equipped it with sonar. Sonar is measuring the ocean floor by sound, by using sound to measure that one. So they sent that ship to the west coast of India, over here, where Dwarka is, and they started mapping the ocean floor. And they found a 9-kilometer long feature at a depth of 40 meters, about 20 kilometers west of Hazira. They found a fortification. Looks like a city wall. A 9-kilometer city wall, about 40 meters below the sea level. And if this is shown to be an urban find, it completely overturns our thinking of where are the earliest urban cities in the world. Today we are told Jericho. Jericho is a biblical city. That is the earliest urban find. However, if this has been validated, this would be one of the earliest cities. What is also exciting is they dredged up a piece of wood. They got a wood also from the same place, and they sent it to Germany as well as Hyderabad for carbon dating. The carbon dating came back with a date of 8,500 years to 9,000 years before present for that wood, showing that whatever was that wall over there is perhaps as ancient as that. Now, what I'm doing is I'm going from 1 million years ago, I went to 350,000 years ago, I went to 40,000 years ago, 35,000 years ago, 20,000, 10,000, now I'm at 9,000, now I'm in 3,500 BCE. So this is an example of a Balochistan pot, very, very beautiful. This news came less than maybe 4 or 5 months ago, and it really shocked us because the archaeologists in Sanauli, Uttar Pradesh, they found a series of graves in which they found chariots in them, remains of chariots. Here are the examples of the chariots over here. Why is this significant? Because our textbooks tell us chariots were brought into India after the invention of iron by the Aryans in 1500 BCE. So they invented iron outside India. They were able to build chariots and have swords and other things. 1500 BC they came. However, the archaeologists say this is at least 2000 BCE. That means before the Aryans came, they apparently already had chariots in India. And all over Mahabharata, Maharathis and others, they were all charioteers. So here is a humped bull with gold horns, 1800 BCE. This is a Sangam era find in Kiradi, Tamil Nadu. Very recently, this news came out saying that outside Madurai, about 1 day's journey outside Madurai, they found an urban settlement. This is that urban settlement they found and some of the artifacts they got from there. However, they excavated 4.5 meters and they sent some samples to United States for carbon dating, and the samples were sent from the 2-meter depth. Although they dug 4.5 meters, they took the middle layer and sent it to USA for dating, and they came back and said 3rd century BCE. And that made everybody very happy. Why? Because it fits with the Aryan invasion theory. Aryan invasion theory tells us that slide that I showed, by 500 BCE, they have occupied North India, and they've chased all the people to the south, and they've become Dravidians. So any urban find in southern India cannot be older than 500 BCE, according to Aryan invasion theory. So when they came back with this date, everybody was very happy. However, I questioned that. I said that ASI reported 4.5 meters of depth. If the top layer is the year 2017, last year when I gave this talk, that means 2 meters down, which is what they did. From the 2-meter sample, they took it. It has to be dated to 2,200 years, which is according to their dating. That means every meter is 1,100 years. That means when you multiply by 4.5, you get a date of 5,000 years before present. That means the sample that we are seeing from Kiradi is perhaps 3000 BCE. So I question, why has the ASI not reported this? So today there is an attempt to control the narrative. The state has taken over Kiradi in excavations in this Hindu October 10, 2017. And whoever was the archaeologist, he was transferred out of the duty over there. So bottom line, the government is trying to control the narrative and not telling the truth about what is going on over here. This is from Arikamedu. So Arikamedu is a place which is a little outside Pondicherry, Puducherry. And this is a port that is mentioned in the Periplus of the Erythraean Sea. Periplus of Erythraean Sea is a port sailors document used by the Roman sailors. It told where are all the ports for trading with them. In that, one of the names is Puduke. Puduke is now identified with Arikamedu. So they traded in dyed muslin and glass beads. And Mortimer Wheeler was a British archaeologist. In 1945, he found a bust of Augustus Caesar there. Augustus Caesar. When he found the bust of Augustus Caesar, that man's reign was around 30 current era. Therefore, he said, let's date this to 100 BCE to 100 current era. Vimala Begley was another archaeologist who worked in this time frame, and she said, no, you have to revise it from 200 BCE to 700 current era. But Vimala Begley also wrote this in her diary. In her diary, she said, Trench 7 is the trench that yielded the oldest material back to 2nd century. We had to stop working because we were under the water table, and even a large pump could not keep the water out. It is on the sea coast. So once they started digging, the water level started coming up, and they couldn't dig any further. Bottom line is, this 200 BCE is not the terminus of finding artifacts. There are artifacts even below that. But technologically, they cannot dig any further over there. Very interesting find. In this map from my friend called Jijit Ravi, what he did was, he took the map of India and he wrote down all the names of places mentioned in the Ramayana and the Mahabharata, wherever Rama visited, wherever the Pandavas visited and everything, and he put them down on the map. And what you see is, it mentions places all over India and outside of India. So the epics are deeply tied to the geography of the land. However, do we consider epics as sources of history? Unfortunately not. Ever since William Jones and others derided it, we don't consider them as sources of history. Instead, this is what you teach your children. You teach your children that this is the Indus Valley civilization, commenced 5,000 years ago, declined 3.6 thousand years ago, and children learn there are empty lands over here. Do you see the irony? I just showed you a few slides of archaeology to show that from 1 million years ago, you have continuum of human habitation in India. But unfortunately, this is the kind of thing we teach our children. So that was the first part that I wanted to show you, which was to look at the evidence from archaeology. I said that there's probably an erased history of India. We are not talking about that, and we need to talk about that. And I tried to show what is the Aryan invasion theory. From that, I said, let us examine the evidence from archaeology. I showed you evidence of habitation for a very, very long time. Now I'm going to an entirely new area. This is the modern field that most people use in archaeogenetics. The reason is, each of us is a walking archaeogenetic artifact. Each of us contains the sum total of mutations of all our ancestors. Our grandfathers, grandmothers, mother's side, father's side, everything going back to a very, very ancient period of time. We carry all those mutations in our saliva sample, in our DNA, and those things. So the methodology is, people use a maternal mitochondrial DNA field data, or the Y chromosomal field data, genome-wide data, do some math and infer by mapping to the real world. So I'm going to give you a very small biology lesson, because you might have forgotten biology completely, high school biology. So the human body has got 22 pairs of chromosomes, which are called the autosomes, and this pair is called the sex chromosomes, so totally 23 pairs over here. Now, during the stage of meiosis is the time of conception, and the conception happens. So if these are the two from the male and the female, basically, before that, let me talk about this. The mother always carries in the sex chromosome, gender chromosome, X and X, and the father carries the X and Y. If they have a daughter, the daughter always gets one X from mother, one X from father. If it is a son, son always gets the X from mother and always gets Y from the father. This is the inheritance that we normally happens. So when the DNA content of the mother and father are there, there's a replication first, and then there is a crossover. During this crossover, genetic material can exchange from mother to father. It's something called recombination, genetic recombination. So scientists today try to study this recombination. So if they are able to go back and take an ancient sample, supposing they have a skeleton from 5,000 years ago, that's an ancient sample, they might take some DNA content over there and try to see modern DNA, how is it related to that ancient DNA, by trying to see how much of recombination might have happened. That is the idea in genetics research. If you take some fellow from Rajarajeshwari Nagar walking on the road and grab that fellow and take his DNA sample, it is not of any use, it is useless. However, if I take 1,000 people or 2,000 people from Rajarajeshwari Nagar and take their DNA and try to see what are all the mutations they are carrying, then a picture is going to emerge, things like this. This is for the Hazara people in Afghanistan. We might be able to say that about 33% of them are carrying mutation number 1, 20% are carrying mutation number 2, then there are some smaller percentage of other mutations. Do you guys see this? So this is the way scientists try to talk about the genetics for a population. Instead of saying for an individual, you now talk for a population, what is the average behavior of these things. So by doing that, there are some markers like A, M, B, T. And for example, this A markers mostly in China and other places and this part. The M marker is very important for India, mostly in India and out of India. The B markers only in Africa, and so on. So this is a way, just by looking at some of who's carrying the markers and how, we can start talking about how people moved in the ancient times. That is the idea. So people first started using the maternal mitochondrial DNA in order to understand how people are moving from one place to another. Don't be put off by words like haplogroup. It only means some kind of property, genetic property. For us, the most important thing here is the M marker. The M markers mostly in India and spread out to the rest of the world. Later on, we'll talk about this in a little detail. People also look at the Y chromosome from the male and try to see that. For us, the most important things are R1A and R1B. This is also mostly in India and mostly in Europe. This is where the battlefield is to understand genetics. I'd like to tell you about the work of Stephen Oppenheimer. In 2003, he wrote this Out of Eden, the Real Eve, by summarizing the genetic research done until that time. So people used the maternal mitochondrial DNA from various parts of the world, trying to say, who are we as a people? So his research starts from 140,000 years ago from Africa, but I'll start the story from 85,000 years ago. So a group of individuals crossed this area in Africa, across this Gulf of Oman, walked across this Iranian and Sindh area, the triangular part of India, all the way to Sumatra, Taiwan, and other places, in this time frame, 85,000 years ago to 75,000 years ago. This is what genetics is saying, according to the genetics. Two questions: what was a migration model, and why did they not go west? Why did they come east? So it turns out that in this time frame, there was one more species of human called Neanderthals. Neanderthals living up to Iran. They lived in Europe up to the hills of Iran. That's the range of the Neanderthals. Today, after many generations of good nutrition, Homo sapien is about 6 feet tall, and we are about 70 kilograms in weight because of good nutrition, such things. However, the early Homo sapien was tiny, maybe about 4.5 feet tall, maybe about 40 kilograms and such thing. He did not want to fight the bigger Neanderthal. That is why they hid from them. They hid from them along the coast and tried to escape from them. And Stephen F. Oppenheimer also provides some archaeological finds of what they ate, where they rested, all these kinds of things. Second is, what is a migration model? Migration model was just like the Bushman society of today. Bushmen are not like us. For example, if I take somebody from here, from Rajarajeshwari Nagar, and tell you, you had to move from here to Hyderabad, and you say, no, it's not possible. I purchased a house here, I have a land here, I have a car, my children are going to school here, I can't go easily from one place. You cannot uproot somebody from here to some other place. In the ancient world, that was not the case. In the ancient world, the bushman has no possessions at all. Just husband, wife, children, bow and arrow, that is it. If resources have run dry, there's no water or food is not there, The whole family will go 1 kilometer down the road and start a new life there. No problem at all. Nobody is there to say, where's your land deed and other such things, where's the patta papers and all those things. Not going to happen. They could easily move around and do that. So that was a migration model. Generation by generation migration. It was never, let's keep walking till we reach Thailand. That did not happen. It is generation by generation. 75,000 years ago, we know that a super volcano erupted in Sumatra. Not an ordinary volcano, a super volcano. How big was that? It covered India and Pakistan by 5 meters of ash. Can you imagine 5 meters of ash? That is 5 into 3, 15 feet. 15 feet of ash covered all of India and Pakistan. It basically extincted the humans who were living in this part of the world. It caused a 6-year nuclear winter, instant 1,000-year ice age, with a dramatic population crash to less than 10,000 adults. All the non-African people of the world today are the descendants of these 10,000 people. All of us are the descendants of those 10,000 people statistically. So this is from a place in Jalapuram where even today the excavation has found the ash layer. And what is more exciting is under the ash layer they find human artifacts showing that before Mount Toba humans are living there. Then you find the ash layer. On top of the ash layer also they find human artifacts saying that repopulation of India has taken place. So very, very interesting finds over here. 65,000 years ago, the ice ages ended in Europe. Once the ice ages ended, it also coincided with the dying of the Neanderthals. The Neanderthals just died out. We don't know why they died out. But they left a vacuum. That vacuum was filled by Homo sapiens. Homo sapiens from this part of India, basically Gujarat and Sindh, they went out, crossed the Bosphorus, and they became the future Europeans. That's where they came from. Then about 40,000 to 25,000 years ago, 40,000 to 25,000 years ago, groups of people from Sindh, from Sumeria, from Bengal area, and from Taiwan area, they all joined in Siberia, crossed the land bridge at that time, and became the future Native Americans. So this is the story of the population of the world by Homo sapiens according to the maternal mitochondrial DNA research. This model, unfortunately, has not told us anything about the linguistic model. So people said, why don't we also look at the Y chromosome? Because the X chromosome is not telling us a proper story. Why don't we look at the Y chromosome? Now, the Y chromosome, we are interested in the mutation called R1A. This split approximately 25,000 years ago. It entered into the record, the mutation record. We know it appeared 25,000 years ago. So Peter Underhill is a researcher. He analyzed several samples and said that it probably arose near Iran, very close to India. And they also started studying a subclade called Z93. Approximately 6,000 years ago, it appeared into the genetic record. So what I did was I put together a bunch of papers that discuss what each researcher is saying. Where did R1A enter into the record, mutation record? So Bashu in 2003 and all the others up to Thangaraj in 2010, this R1A, this man says Central Asia, Southern Asia, North India, Southern Asia, South Asia, Northwestern India, South Asia, South Asia. Bottom line is almost every researcher here is saying whether you look at the maternal DNA, mitochondrial DNA, or you look at the male Y chromosome, they are telling a stable story. They are saying it is out of India, Indic origin. It fails to validate the linguistic model. This is the research up to 2010. I know the subject is a little difficult. I can see some of you are feeling a little tired. I'll try to finish this subject soon and go to the next subject. This is a superstar professor, very, very famous man. His name is Professor David Reich from Harvard University. He wrote this book recently, Who We Are and How We Got Here, on the basis of his research. So the failure to validate the narrative, the linguistic narrative, led him to ask the question, why are we looking only at the X and Y chromosome? You still have 22 chromosomes left. So why don't we study the 22 chromosomes and see, does that support the Aryan invasion theory? So you see how the research is going. They constantly want to prove the Aryan invasion theory, so they keep looking for this. So in his research, Before 2010, the computers were not powerful, so you could not do much of the computation necessary. After 2010, computers are more powerful. You can do brute force analysis. You can do much more things. So the methods that he did was, see, one more thing is, if you have a skeleton that is under the grave for a long period of time, 2,000, 3,000 years, what is going to happen? The DNA is going to get contaminated with bacteria. So bacteria DNA will contaminate human DNA. So it's difficult to extract the correct thing. Second is, because it is lying under the soil, under salt water and other such things, mineralization can happen. That also can destroy the DNA. So what they do is, they use the present day human DNA to reconstruct the ancient fragments. So they might get a fragment here, fragment here, fragment here. They'll use today's samples and say, okay, let's fill in the blanks. And that's how they construct the ancient samples. So that is a method. That's what he himself describes in this page. So I'm not going to read all this. I'll just tell you very briefly what he did. He said that Europeans are more closely related to Indians than to the Chinese. Europeans closer to Indians than to Chinese. Then he found Chinese are more closely related to Indians than to Europeans. So Chinese close, but not related over here. However, the model that he used was not this. Anybody would have said India is the source, and from Indians came others. He used this model. In this model, he said both the Europeans and Indians have a common ancestor, that is a hypothesized Proto-Indo-European speakers, and all his work is based on such a faulty model. Why? Because he wants to prove the Aryan invasion theory. He wants to get there. So his basis of his work itself is wrong. So I'm calling it out, what is the model validity? It's not okay. So his current research says that Indians have got strong affinity to ancient Iranian farmers 9,000 years ago. So he's saying 9,000 years ago, Iranian farmers came into India, affected northern India, southern India, and everything. Then 4,000 years ago, the steppe people came and affected the present-day Indians. This is the Aryan invasion theory. So he's saying that 4,000 years ago, they came and impact. So this is the latest research as of July, August 2018. This is what people have been saying. Now, I am going to contradict this and show a couple of contradictory papers. This paper came out in 2018. This is by Vagish Narasimhan and others from his lab, David Reach's lab. They say that there's admixture from Yamnaya. What is admixture? It means that if there is one population here and another population here, ancient population, when they start mixing and going on, that process is called admixture. So in their result, they came out, their conclusion was, the present day Indian population shows admixture from Yamnaya. You remember Yamnaya in my earlier slide. It is from Aryan invasion theory. However, another group of researchers from Scandinavia in May 2018 came with a paper saying there is no admixture from Yamnaya, which is the exact opposite of what David Reach's paper said. So here you are two research groups using the same data, same problem. One person is saying it mixed from Yamnaya, other person is saying there's no mixture from Yamnaya. So there is a professor called Premendra Priyadarshi who's based in the United Kingdom. So he has been critiquing some of these works too. So he did a brilliant thing. This professor, what he did is, he took figure 3 of one of those papers, that Scandinavian paper, and he said, by your figure 3, you're claiming that so much of the outside DNA is there in India. To give an analogy, 1,000 years ago, let us take some village in Tamil Nadu with 95 people who have been living there. Over there, we'll put 5 people, let us say, from Scandinavia and put them there. So 5 foreigners, 95 Indians. 1,000 years later, you look at their descendants, and their population is mostly from these 5 foreigners, and no trace of this 95 Indians who are living there. You see what I'm saying? So he tried to say, based on your figure 3, I'm going to estimate how many foreigners came to India that time as a function of how many people lived in Saraswati Sindhu civilization. His result said that you must have had 4 times the population of the Indus Valley civilization for you to come and overwhelm the genetics of the people living there, so that today's populations are based on Central Asia. You understand the argument? So today we know that we can estimate the Harappa civilization supported between 2 million to 5 million people. So 5 million times 4 means 20 million people came from Central Asia. They left their women behind because they're not present in the genetic record. Only the men came, and these men are supposed to have overwhelmed the existing population, and their DNA is present in your genes and my genes today. This is the story. So Premendra Priyadarshi calls out this one saying, desert, arid, Central Asia sent 4 times the population? Really? So it's a rebuttal paper, basically. One more example I want to give. This is from 2015, Hereditary Genetics, a French professor. So what he did was, he said, I'm not going to Rajarajeshwari Nagar and take some 1,000 people's sample. I'm not going to do that. If I'm going to use your sample, I'll ask you, are you living in the same place as your grandfather? Maybe your neighbor came from northern India or so he cannot be used. If you're living in the same place as your grandfather, that means there's some stability. I'll use your genes in my study. So in other words, he was very careful with what is my population for my genetic studies. So having used it based on the grandfather's location, he tried to work backwards and see where is the most common recent ancestor for the Indian people. For Pakistan and India, he found that is 15,000 years ago. In contrast to David Reich, who said 4,000 years ago, we have a common ancestor in Central Asia. This man's research found 15,000 years ago, we have a common ancestor somewhere. I put this figure to show you that even though papers come in Nature or Cell or some of the big publications, you should not be swayed away by it because Harvard University or Berkeley and things like that, it could still have rubbish in it. Peer review needs to catch these issues. You need to critique these things carefully. So I showed 2 or 3 results over here where there's opposite results, all kinds of things are happening. Not going to bore you with all these things. There's a lot of mathematics and other modeling to do here. Not a good thing to talk after lunch. So I will avoid talking. But the point is, all this tries to help you to understand that in genetics research today, you first go and take the samples. When you take the samples, how are you collecting the sample? One person was careful saying, I'll only take the sample if you're living in your grandfather's same place. That you understand what I mean. So that is one way. Second is, you don't have the ancient DNA. So you're going to reconstruct that using chimpanzee DNA, human DNA. Those are all the techniques people have used. How are the lab methods? What lab methods are you going to use to reconstruct the data? Then the third thing, so first is the field worker. Field worker goes and gets the samples. It goes to a lab. Biology PhD is working and getting the data. Then that goes next to the bioinformatics team. Bioinformatics team is now going to develop the models. These are the various models. For example, in this model, there is population 1, population 2. They make a hybrid generation. Then population 1 does not give its genetics. Only population 2 will continue to impact this population. So this is one kind of model. Another kind of model is 2 ancient populations. They make a hybrid, but both of them give genetic content into the future hybrids. This is another kind of model. Third kind of model is population 1, population 2. They make a hybrid, but their genetic content has stopped. Only the hybrid continues by itself later on. So there are many, many models in biology that you can use for admixture. The question is, what are you going to use? This is, for example, the paper for America. For USA, the black population and the white population. So the black and whites mixed and made a hybrid, but then the blacks were not allowed to add to the genetic pool. So only the whites continued adding. So this could be the kind of model for America. Maybe they use the same model for Indians also. I don't know. Maybe this is the Central Asians coming in, and this is the native Harappa people living there, and maybe this is the model. I don't know. But the issue is sampling, data reconstruction, model, what kind of mathematics you're going to use. Once the mathematics is over, how sensitive are your results? You have to do that. Then when you have a bunch of mathematical numbers, the professor will come in and make a theory. We'll put that thing in a social theory saying, this number tells me that Central Asians over here, and this one is over here, migration from here. So bottom line, in this whole business, there is a lot of things we can critique. Just because a model converged does not infer that it is a correct model. That is the bottom line. Almost anybody here who's an engineer understands that a model can admit multiple answers, assuming your model is correct. Assuming your model is correct, assuming your data is correct, assuming you do a fitting, maybe the model does not have just one answer. Maybe it has got multiple answers. Just because you converge to one answer doesn't mean you can use from that and get a global result saying, this is the story of human migration. We can't do that. There's a lot of diligence to be done. That is the bottom line of all this. I'm not going to explain that. This is a paper that came out in 2015 from Berkeley. You'd think that's an amazing paper. But I want to give an example of how they are today trying to get linguistics and genetics combined together and trying to make a theory. And in the process, they have a circular logic. So in this paper, what they did was, they said that these are all the various people of the world. So you can see, for example, these are all the genetic constraints. This is saying these people are related, these people are related, and so on. So the black lines are the genetic constraints. The red dots are all the time constraints coming from linguistic models. Using linguistic models, they get time. So you have constraints on time, you have constraints on type of people. So here, for example, is Vedic Sanskrit. This is one of the oldest that you have here. This is approximately 2500 BCE. The Hittites are next over here. Then you have ancient Greek is over here. So you see these red bars are all the time constraints for linguistics. So these people use a dictionary of 200 words. They use the ancestry constraints with the black bars, time constraints with the red bars. They did a statistical model. And then they said, look, after everything's converged, I have got closeness to the Steppe model. The Steppe model is the Aryan invasion theory. However, everything is circular logic. You started your work with a set of assumptions, and you worked your way back to the assumptions and said, look, I'm correct. So this is completely wrong. So you don't do circular logic like this. So conclusion from this one is, today genetic studies use preconceived models and markers as constraints. The results are not primary evidence. One has got to be very careful when you use mathematical numbers alongside a narrative. Otherwise, subjective biases will come. Today, the researchers are guided by the biases of the historical discourse. They use those as guiding constraints of the mathematics to develop their theories. It's all circular logic. So genetics cannot be admitted in any discourse on who are the Indian people today. Unfortunately, that's where it is. So I'd like to jump from that to simpler technique. That is the hardest so far. So let's go to the rest of it. Yes, sir. So I just have now completed the archaeogenetics area. So I started by describing the problems in our textbooks. I started showing you Aryan invasion theory, what are they teaching us. Then we looked at archaeology evidence. Then we looked at archaeogenetics, and I criticized some of the papers coming from there and said that we cannot use that as a basis of our national identity or who we are. However, that is what is happening in the newspapers. Every time a paper comes from Harvard or from Berkeley, we have journalists in India who don't understand anything in science. Immediately they say that a paper has come that is telling the final story in Aryan invasion, and people are confused. They don't know that. So it is necessary to be critical and understand from a scientific point of view the merits of the paper. What is the constraint in which the research has been done? You cannot take it and conflate it to a huge claim. That is the bottom line. So now I'd like to show you evidence from several fields of study that offer no support to the Aryan invasion theory. That's our next thing. First thing is about the continuity of civilization. This is Dr. B.B. Lal. He is one of India's most famous archaeologists. He must be about 98 years old. He's still alive, 98 years old. So early in his career, he found something called painted graveware and other things in northern India, Haryana. He dated it to around 1200, 1300 BCE. And the basis of that, he said, there's no evidence that Mahabharata ever took place because the archaeology is not there. At that time, he was a darling of the Marxists. They loved him for everything he's saying. But eventually, as his work progressed in his career, he started finding more and more things that told him that there is no separation of Harappa and then the Aryans. He saw a continuity on civilization. He saw a continuity. Once he started publishing those works, the Marxists promptly isolated him. So his work became very isolated. So he found, for example, everybody knows this is the famous Pashupati figure, which is there in Mohenjo-daro. It's like a Shiva in meditation pose. The swastika symbol from Mohenjo-daro, very, very prominent with Hindu thinking and so on. Here are a couple of figurines that he found from Harappa that show ladies with the sindoor. Even today, married women in India wear the sindoor. And here you are in Harappa, they have the sindoor on them. So a cultural practice from ancient times till current times. Here is a figurine, terracotta figurine, showing a namaste pose. Very, very common. Namaste is a very deeply Hindu idea. It says, the Narayana in me is bowing to the Narayana in you. That's a very deeply Hindu idea. And that is over here in this figurine over here. Professor Dr. S.R. Rao, who's another archaeologist, he found a Shivalinga in Kalibangan near Lothal, which is also part of the Harappa time frame. Then they found several terracotta figurines that show yoga asanas, figurines showing yoga asanas. Yoga is an integral part of Hinduism, but it appears to be there already in Harappa. So the message from all of these things is that there is no periodization. You cannot say Harappa is separate and Vedic civilization is separate. It seems to have a continuity of ideas all the way through. So he brought about the idea that there's a continuity of civilization. All of these eminent historians, gentlemen here, are the people who are trying to show it is an out of India theory. This is Dr. Srini Kalyanaraman, the founder of Saraswati Research Center in Chennai, Dr. Rajaraman, Srikant Talageri, Subhash Kak, David Frawley, Conrad Elst, and Kazanas, and many others. These are just some of the prominent people who are working on ideas like this, continuity of civilization. This is an important one. So this one is a news item in Times of India from 2015, May 2015, that said iron was discovered in Telangana in 2200 BCE. Why is it important? Because Tiwari in 2003 and Banerjee in 1965 came out with a statement that Aryans brought Iron Age to India in 1500 BCE. And that is there in all our textbooks, what your children learn and so on. So this one invalidates that. This is led by Professor K.P. Rao, and these are some of the artifacts they found over here. We already talked about this, about Sanauli, UP, where they found chariots. It invalidates the idea that Aryans brought horse and chariots to India. This is what we have been told. But then after Sanauli, they found that graves with chariot remains dating back to 2000 BCE. Much before the so-called Aryans coming to India. And this is bronze, Harappa bronze in the National Museum in New Delhi, 2000 BCE, showing a man on a chariot and these things. So you can see that there's something wrong with the narratives. This is a very interesting one. So this is from a paper in PLOS. This is in 2009, published by Gwen Robbins, a researcher who I'm trying to correspond with to ask her the original works. I still don't have it from her. She discovered 5 skeletons in Balathal, Rajasthan. This is dating back to 2500 BCE. She wrote a paper on leprosy, skeletal evidence of leprosy in India in 2000 BCE, based on the first skeleton. The 5th skeleton is over here. What does it look like? He's gone into samadhi. He's gone into samadhi, completely stopped eating, stopped breathing, everything samadhi. Yeah, so we found this one over here. It invalidates that Aryans brought Vedic religion into India in 1500 BC because here is evidence right here. This is a powerful paper. This came out in May 2018 in Science, Current Science, from the Institute of Paleosciences in Lucknow. These are the professors who worked on that. And they found evidence of paddy cultivation. Paddy is rice. Paddy cultivation in the Holocene era in the Ganga plain. Holocene means 12,000 years ago. So 12,000 years ago, paddy was being cultivated in the Ganga plain. What does it invalidate? It invalidates the claim that agriculture was invented in Turkey in 7000 BCE and it spread to India along with the language. It invalidates that claim. Here's one more research. This is from 2007 in genomic biology. This is from Dr. Premendra Priyadarshi. So he said, this paper talks about the common house mice. You know, the small common house mice. So some scientists decided to see who is the ancestor of all the mice, and they took the genomes of the mice and made a study of worldwide genomes of the mice. And the results showed, here is the ancestor of all the mice. Do you see this? India. From India, it goes to Madagascar, it goes to Europe, Africa, Northern Africa, into Europe, into Central Asia, Southeast China, and everywhere. What is more remarkable is that the ancestor is 12,000 years ago. Why is that relevant? You know that mice come when you store paddy. Wherever there's agriculture and you store paddy in your storeroom, that is where mice also come. So once agriculture was invented in India and spread from India to other parts of the world, the mice also went along. Powerful, very powerful paper. So this researcher's got nothing to do with this researcher. But then these are two different pieces of work that suddenly start telling you a story that is completely different from what we have been told for so long. So my bottom line from everything is the Aryan invasion theory is false. Archaeology shows very ancient artifacts in Northwest, South, Central Asia, human continuum for 1 million years, genetic evidence of a very ancient people in India, and the mtDNA and RNA show robust presence in India. So with this, I decided to also put what does our internal evidence tell us? Our internal evidence, mind you, is always disregarded, discredited, and ignored. So I tried to see what do the Vedas and Puranas talk? Do they say that they came from Central Asia into India? No, they don't. Nowhere in the Vedas, Puranas, any Indian works, there's evidence of people migrating into India. Rather, they talk about the Anu and the Drihyu, Vedic tribes, who migrated from Punjab to Gandhara. Outside, they went outside India, the Anu and the Drihyu. This evidence is ignored. This evidence is there in Bhagavata Purana, Vishnu Purana, Vayu Purana, Brahmanda Purana, Matsya, and so on. Also in the Rig Veda, evidence of the Anu and Drihyu. It is there all over our text. This can account for the genetic things that people are finding. Their direction is wrong. They seem to think from outside India to here, and they are concocting all kinds of things to make it happen. Whereas the most natural thing is, during the Vedic era time, during the Rig Vedic period, there are some tribes that left India and went outside, and that can account for the reason why you're seeing genetic closeness. Second thing is, the drying up of the Saraswati in 1900 BCE, that resulted in outward migration, and that resulted in people called the Hittites, the Mitannis. In Egypt, there was a people called the Hyksos people, who suddenly appeared into Egypt, and they were the rulers over there. Where did they come from? So we know that there were contacts between Mitanni kings and the pharaohs in Egypt. Why is that relevant? There are some reasons I can talk about in a different research, but I don't think it's relevant today. So this can account for genetic closeness. Very quickly, I'd like to talk to you about two ideas. People keep saying that the Indus Valley civilization was destroyed by the invading Aryans. You all agree? Anybody disagrees? This is what you learned in your textbook, right? Textbook says that. So if there were no Aryan invasion theory, what caused the collapse? What does science tell us? This is a paper that came out in 2014 in Nature, and it says a 200-year drought cycle doomed the Indus Valley civilization. In other words, the monsoons failed for 200 years. That caused it. Today, you live in a city, Bengaluru, that has got no river nearby. But using electricity and pipelines, you can take water from Kaveri hundreds of kilometers away, and Bengaluru is surviving. What about the ancient days? All the cities were by riversides. If the water runs dry, you have no option. Whether you have built a huge Mohenjo-daro, Harappa, Lothal, shipyard, magnificent buildings, you leave everything, take your family and go where water is. Within one generation, you'll do that. However magnificent your city is, you'll do that. That is what happened. 200-year drought cycle doomed the Indus Valley civilization. The next thing that I want to talk about is poverty in India. Most people, especially the Marxists, they look at the poverty in India and they put an idea into your head. What is that idea? The social structures of Hinduism, the so-called caste system, kept those people where they are, and that is the reason for their poverty. That is the idea that most people have internalized, including the so-called Dalits, the so-called that, whatever, they've internalized this idea. So there's anger created by several vested interests to keep a false idea in place. We want to see what caused widespread poverty in India. This is Angus Maddison. He's a historical economist. So his job is to study the history of the economies in the various parts of the world. So he started studying the history from the year 1 of the Common Era to 2003. And he found the GDPs of India, Middle East, China, Western Europe, and USA. And he said, as a percentage of the world GDP, India was one of the highest at 35% of the world GDP, followed by China at around 25%, Europe and Middle East around 15%, and USA did not exist. India went through a period of decline for almost 1,000 years as the Muslim invasions and other things are happening, a period of decline, reached a bottom point here. Then after the Marathas had consolidated, it slightly went up until this point. Then the colonialists came around 1700 current era, and rapidly India goes down. At the same time, Western Europe goes up. So this graph very powerfully shows from a very high level that there's a transference of wealth from India into Western Europe that caused the poverty in India. At a very high level, we can see that. There are a lot of details I can take up in the question and answer if you're interested. Here is one more person called Will Durant. Will Durant wrote on the history of civilizations. He is an American. He did not have sympathy for the British. He came to India around 1930, and he was very horrified when he saw what the British had done in India too. He was aware the Indian civilization is ancient and powerful. So what happened? He said the East India Company forced the Indians to sell cheap and buy exorbitantly, extracted hundreds of millions of dollars. Indians were taxed 2 times as England, 3 times as Scotland, and the cost of all their conquest, developments, and administration was charged to the Indians, whether it was the battles with the French, First World War, the building of the railways, or whatever, everything was charged to Indians. He said the British incurred a debt for India. The debt in 1792 was $35 million. By the time it was 1860, it was $500 million. 1930, when he left India, it was $3.5 billion. The dollar rate is as of 1930, not as of 2018, as of 1930 exchange rate. After this was World War II. So by the time the British left India, this figure was maybe 3 or 4 times bigger than this. So now, if any of you have got any ideas why India became so poor, these 2 graphs must tell you a very powerful story, what happened to India. Don't take the present picture of India and project it backwards to 2,000 years saying we have been poor all the time. That is completely false, completely false. This graph is showing you Indians were the richest. What does that mean? It was not the Brahmins who were richest. Brahmins, the people are praying and such things. They were not the richest. Who do you think was the richest over here? Yes, today if I ask you what is your aspiration, you'll say, I want to buy a house in a posh locality. I want to buy an Audi car. My children want some iPads or iPhones and things like that. I want to wear Armani clothes. But if you go about 1,000 years ago and ask a man on the road, what is your aspiration? He'd say that, look, I'd like to have clothes to wear. I'd like to buy some jewelry for my wife. I want to have some pots and pans to do cooking. You understand? These are all the kind of things that they want. Who made these things? The ironsmith would do the pots and pans. The goldsmith will do the gold and other such things. The cotton textile workers will do this. These are all the artisan classes. The artisan classes prepared all the goods necessary for the huge population of India. And the farmers and the artisans were the richest people in India, the so-called lower caste. They were the richest people in India. Followed next by the Vaishyas, who were the business guilds and so on, and the Kshatriyas who had some power. The Brahmin was always at the mercy of all these classes, working on handouts and such things. So one has got to understand these things, what happened. What happened here was an inversion, the Industrial Revolution. By the time this happened, the British were doing 2 or 3 things. One thing is they had destroyed the Indian education system by a process of taxation. Overnight, if you take Tanjavur as an example, which I'm very familiar with, Tanjavur fell due to something called doctrine of lapse. When the doctrine of lapse happened and they grabbed Tanjavur, the taxation rate went from 20% and 15% to 56%. Once it went to 56%, the farmers could no longer afford to pay the tax and such things, and their land was confiscated, goods are confiscated, people became poor. The only thing they could do was walk to Chennai and sit on the docks waiting for the British to pick them up and take them by ship to Fiji, Mauritius, Malaysia, and other places, indentured slaves. You understand? So today, if you go to Africa and West Indies and wonder, how did Tamilians come here? How did the Biharis come here? These two communities, this is exactly what the British did. This is how it came. Second thing they did, they took a lot of knowledge systems from the artisans. The British had no idea how to make textiles. The iron making by the uruk is wood steel that the Indians had, they had no idea how to make all of these things. They came to India, learned from the artisan classes, took a lot of Indian math, astronomy, technology, and everything over there. With the tax money they were extracting out of Indians, they were able to subsidize their own science and technology, their own industrial revolution, and the finished goods was forcibly sold to India. So guess who became impoverished? The artisans. Nobody would buy the artisans' works anymore because people were forced to buy from UK. Finished products are coming from there. Why do you think Mahatma Gandhi said, wear khadi, don't go to Lancashire, don't take their clothes? Because he saw what was happening. He saw how people are becoming poor, and he did that. So that is number one. Artisans became impoverished because of this policy. What about the Vaishyas? They were also taxed, they also became impoverished. What about the Kshatriyas? Because of doctrine of lapse, even their lands were seized from them and landlords are curbed and such things, so even they lost their power. What about the Brahmins? Well, Brahmins is a very interesting story. The Brahmins were typically teaching in village schools. Every village had a temple which was also a school. We know that from the works of Dharampal. Dharampal has written how things were. And he says in the average school when the British came, more than 50% were the so-called lower caste, and about 20% were maybe the Vaishyas, 10% Kshatriyas, and maybe about 6% were Brahmins in these schools, typical schools. He says the schools were not supported by the king. The schools were supported by the temple. The temple was supported by the people. People will give a portion of the produce every year to that. Because my own wife's family used to do this. They used to own lands, and whenever they grow paddy, some amount of paddy is given to Kanchipuram for the Kanchi Matam. So this is the practice that Indians followed, and this is how temples were supported. Once the taxation in Tanjavur became 56%, they could no longer afford to do that. So the entire Indian learning system collapsed, so even the Brahmin was out of a job. Then came Macaulay saying that let's disconnect the Indians from the tradition. And so let's introduce a class of English-speaking people who are neither Indians nor Westerners, but they'll follow our line. They'll become like pseudo-Westerners and so on. When they wanted, what they did was to get a job in the British Empire, you must know English. Only if you know English or you're a Christian, then you will get a job. And who are the people to teach English? The only people they favored were the Brahmins. The out-of-job Brahmins, in order to eat, he took up a job to teach English. So Brahmins became the school teachers, college teachers, and the clerks and other such things. The missionaries turned around, looked at the impoverished artisans who had become very, very poor and said, you know who's responsible for what you are? It is the Brahmins. They turned around and said the Brahmins are responsible for your problems. So this is a whole story of deception that has been played on India that needs to be unraveled. These maps tell you from 1 mile high when you're looking at it, there's a story here. There's a very deep story here. There's a very deep story here, which you can talk for hours on these things and talk about what happened to India. But let me very quickly go on. Are we okay on the time, or should I continue? Or Okay. So I'd now like to go to an entirely different area. I want to finish the talk soon, so I'm going to go a little fast. I want to say how ancient is the Indian civilization. I'm going to use archaeoastronomy. How many of you came to yesterday's talk? Oh, quite a lot. So then I don't have to talk about astronomy because we talked about this yesterday. So I'll skip this one. So only bottom line is, yesterday we talked about all of these things, about the nakshatra, which is Revati, we talked about that. We talked about Kali Yuga, which is remarked as 3102 BCE. We talked about Abhijit from 14,000 years ago. We talked about Shatapatha Brahmana, 2982 BCE. We talked about Taittiriya Samhita in winter solstice, 8921 BCE. We talked about Agastya, Rohini Shakata Veda. So yesterday's talk I talked about all these things, I'm not going to repeat it. So bottom line is I wanted to show how old are the Indians. From our texts, if you look at the astronomical measurements and you try to see how old these things are, these appear to be like 9,000 years old, 10,000 years old, 12,000 years old, and so on. When the British encountered these things, they could not take it because of the first thing that I said. They were Christians. They could not take it. They said that 3000 BCE, God destroyed all these things. You cannot have record of these things. So they started saying these are forgeries. These texts are not reliable. They're all messed up. So they discredited all these things. That is why even today our Marxist historians don't take any of these things. Even today, I'm not going to tell any names, but a very famous director of a very famous think tank in India, professor, he came and told me that I don't believe any of these things. I don't think these measurements are real. So this is the thinking they're put into people's head, where they can't even take the precision of sciences to tell you whether these dates are valid or not. So how old is the Indian civilization? Genetics shows a very ancient people living continuously in India for 85,000 years ago. Archaeology shows artifacts from 1 million years ago. Investigation in astronomy shows artifacts from 24,000 years ago. Now, yesterday I also talked to you about this first part, about Indian knowledge systems. We talked about Shruti, Smriti, about all the various philosophical schools. We talked about Pramana, some ancient text, astronomical discoveries, Surya Siddhanta, Aryabhatiya, about Brahmagupta, Bhaskara, Madhava. So we talked about all these things. So the intention of that was to show you that we have been told that anything of value in Indian knowledge is not of Indic origin. It has come from the Greece or the Babylonians or the Egyptians. They gave, for some reason, nothing is Indian. Everything is from outside. And you have to wonder, how is it possible? Are our ancestors so stupid that they had no idea to make anything? So that narrative does not ring true. So the reason why I put that earlier section was to show you that there's a very strong ecosystem of learning in India. In the Shruti, Smriti, and all of these things, whatever your intellectual persuasion was, whether mathematics, astronomy, rituals, prose, poetry, dance, art forms, the intellectual atmosphere was present in India and to support it. There's no problem at all. That's why I showed you all of those things. Now I'd like to address the allegation that India was on the receiving end of Greek and Babylonian knowledge. I want to show you evidence of transfer of knowledge from India to the outside world in various periods of time. People tell me, all right, Dr. Vedam, so you're saying that knowledge went outside India. How did it go? What was the route for knowledge transfer? Who were the people involved in it? What was the knowledge system involved in it? How did it impact those other areas? These are all the critical questions that I have to address if I say that. So I put high-level ideas, starting with the first route for knowledge transfer. There are Vedic records of migration to the West. If you read Shrikant Talageri and Kazinas, they discuss how the mandalas of the Rig Veda were written such that there is evidence of east to west migration. There's evidence of east to west migration, so that is over there. Second thing is, we talked about the Indus and the Saraswati. Saraswati River dried up in the year 1900 BCE, fully dried up. That caused a migration of people to all parts. Some of them went inside India, some of them went outside India, and so on. And the people who went outside India perhaps became the Mitannis, the Hittites, and other people who spoke Sanskrit. For example, the Mitanni people spoke Sanskrit. So we have evidence of these things. So perhaps that is where these things came from. So, like I said, contact with the Mitannis, Hittites, Calamites, Babylonians in this time frame. Then Mycenaeans. The Mycenaeans are the precursors of the later Greek people, the Greek people. Around 1000 BCE, I think there was contact. The reason for my saying is that if you take any story from Greece, there is a parallel with India. I'm pointing at the person who loves stories over there. If you take any story from from Mycenaean period, you can show an exact parallel with a Puranic story. And the question is, where did it come from? And my belief is there was contact between the people in this period of time. There is evidence for these assertions from internal evidence of Vedas. We already talked about Anu and Drihyu. Correlation of climate change records, appearance of Sanskritic people in Mideast, echoes of Indic thought in those cultures, I'm showing echoes of Indic thought in my talk on antiquity of Indian medical systems. It is there on YouTube. You can take a look at that. I'm showing how Ayurveda knowledge is there in the Mitannis, in the Kassites, Elamites, and other people, including the Egyptians, in a very early period of time. So you can go and look for that, echoes of Indic thought, strong parallels and stories of astronomy and heroes, and travel by Greek scholars to India in this time frame, 3000 to 300 BCE. In the Greek kingdom, civilization, there was thinking that a person's education is not complete until he goes to India. He has to go to India, get education, then only his education is complete. We know of Pythagoras, we know of Democritus, we know of Pyrrhon, we know of many other travelers, Greek travelers who came to India, took knowledge, and went back to Greece. Maybe I'll touch one or two of them later. Second route for knowledge transfers after Alexander, 300 BC to 100 BCE. He left behind a bunch of Indo-Greek kingdoms that were the buffer from this part of India to this part of the Mediterranean world. It caused a lot of knowledge transfer. Third route is the Silk Route. The Silk Route was a trade route between China and the Mediterranean places, but also involved India. Now, I'd like to give the example of the Bower manuscript. The Bower manuscript is the oldest Indian medical works that is existing today. It is written in a birch bark document in Gupta Brahmi script is written in there. That's why we know the time period, 300 current era. That one contains evidence of Bela Samhita. It contains Charaka Samhita. It talks about the rishis, Atreya, Garga, Parashara. It talks about those rishis. It talks about the Vata, Pitta, Kapha, and all those kind of things. This document was found here in Kashgar, Xinjiang province, Kashgar. It was found and given to a British officer called Bower. That's why it's called Bower manuscript. But the fact that an Indian medical document was found on a trade route is proof that Indian knowledge was also part of things that are going out of India to the Mediterranean world, to Chinese world, and so on. We already talked about Periplus of the Erythraean Sea. It's a port sailor's document around the turn of the current era. So this document said where are all the ports in India for trading. So Roman ships could come from Rome, cross this land bridge, then they take another ship and come cross this and trade over here and go back. That was a trade route. And that was also a conduit for knowledge transfer from India to these places in the time frame from 200 BCE to 500 current era. Why did it end? It ended because in the year 300, Constantine adopted Christianity in the Roman Empire. Once Constantine adopted Christianity, they decided that they want to destroy all the other religions which they called pagan, all the pagan religions. So they went around destroying the Greek civilization, the libraries were burned, the temples were destroyed, all these kind of things. And immediately Europe went into dark ages. As long as they had contact with India, they had rational thinking, they had medicine, they had learning, they had all these kind of things. But once they became Christian, they went into dark ages. They went into illiteracy, they went into diseases, they had all kinds of poverty and all kinds of rubbish. So the trade stopped approximately 500 current era after Europe became Christian. That is the bottom line here. The fifth route for knowledge transfer is during the Muslim period. So Sindh fell to Bin Qasim. Bin Qasim is a fellow, the Muslim, who came around 711 current era. So when that happened, they forcibly took some Brahmins from here. Their names are supposed to be Manka or Kanka. They took these Brahmins from there to Baghdad and forced them to translate the books. The books that they translated were Brahmasputta Siddhanta and Charaka Samhita and Shushruta Samhita, and several other works were translated from Sanskrit into Arabic, where in the court of Harun al-Rashid, that was the person. In Baghdad, they formed something called Baghdad House of Wisdom, because they encouraged learning. The Muslim kings in that part, they encouraged learning. So all the texts they were getting from India were translated into Arabic, and their scholars were reading these. They also had ancient Greek texts with them, which are also copies of Indian works, and they studied them side by side. So some of the greatest Arabic scientists, Al-Kindi, Al-Ghazali, Al-Fazali, All these people were in an enviable position in that time. They had Indian texts, they had Greek texts, they did comparative study and proposed new works. That was the kind of learning in that era of time. The Muslims controlled from Sindh, Afghanistan, the Arabian, whole of the Arabian part, Egypt, Algeria, Morocco, up to Spain. So this was the Abbasid Caliphate, up to southern Spain. So Indian works translated into Arabic was injected into all these lands until Spain. This is the bottom line. Not only during bin Qasim's time, even during the Delhi Sultanate time, there was translations of works. How do we know that? Because when Ghazni came to India, he got a recommendation letter from Sultan of Baghdad saying that, please take this person, what is his name? I forget his name, the traveler to India. Once again? Al-Biruni came with a recommendation letter from them saying, this is a scholar, please take him along with you to Hindustan. So Al-Biruni came to India, went to Ujjain, went to other places, copied Indic works and everything, took it. So from the time of bin Qasim, going to Delhi Sultanate, going into Mughal period, continuously Indian texts were translated into Arabic and injected into Spain and other places. Sixth route for knowledge transfer. We always have been visited by church travelers from 10th century to 19th century who took information directly from India into Europe. Indian knowledge first impacted the Greeks and the Romans. I'll talk about that in just the next few slides. It was destroyed by the Christians when Europe became Christian in 300 current era. But some of these works survived in Muslim lands. It was not Muslim in that time. Lebanon, Syria, Beirut, and all these places. It survived in those places. They were inherited by the Muslims. Muslims also took knowledge destructively from India. They would go to India, kill those people, burn the libraries, but having taken the texts already from them. Brahmins would be killed. So all this knowledge was injected into Europe. How did that happen? That happened through the translation school in Toledo. So if you look at this map, southern Spain, Cordoba was Muslim. Northern Spain, Toledo was the Christian capital. There's a monastery there whose only job was to translate from Arabic into Latin. Take the Arabic work and translate it into Latin. How do we know that? Because we have one name, Gerard of Cremona. Gerard of Cremona, who lived in the 11th century, he translated 87 Arabic works into Latin. And some of them were Indian astronomy, Indian mathematics, so many other Indian works were translated. So this way, this knowledge was injected into Europe. You must understand, Europe was still in dark ages at this time. So the Europeans used to send their eldest son to Muslims, to Spain, to learn, because they said Muslims have got superior knowledge than us. So they'd go there and learn and come back. So next were the colonialists from 16th century to 20th century. The Portuguese, Dutch, French, British, they also acquired a lot of works. I have an entire paper on this. So if you're interested, please search for my name, Waves 2018 Dallas. There's a PDF paper that you can download for free. I've given a lot of precise references, more than 50 references of knowledge transfer items from India to other parts. So here I'm talking to you about some specifics. Pythagoras, 570 BCE. So these people, Albert Burke, Ian Marlowe, and G.R.S. Mead, they all say that Pythagoras came to India and he learned everything that he learned in India and took it back to Greece. When he came back to Greece, they called him a madman because he had become a vegetarian. They said he only ate nuts and fruits, vegetables, would not eat meat anymore. He had become a vegetarian. Next, he formed a Gurukulam kind of school where he was the Acharya in charge and his bachelor students were around him. Inner circle was the students and the newer students at the outer circle. Exactly the same as a Gurukulam model, he adopted it into thing. This was inherited by Socrates, by Plato, by Aristotle. All of them inherited the same Gurukulam school. Third thing is he believed in transmigration of the soul, reincarnation. So here's an entire paper on reincarnation as Pythagoras had believed. He also was responsible for transmission of music. I'm going to be talking about this in New Delhi on 29th. So bottom line, Samaveda music has got pentatonic music and heptatonic music. This music was introduced by Pythagoras into Greece and it became part of the Western music tradition. So he's responsible for that also. He's responsible for the so-called Pythagorean triangle, the right-angle triangle, was present in Shulba Sutras much before Pythagoras. So all those things. So he is responsible for a lot of transfer. If you look at the Rishi Kanada and Democritus, okay? So Kanada, who wrote Vaisheshika Sutra, he said to understand Brahman, you should understand the natural world. 9 classes of reality and infinity. Creation is made up of atoms. Atman pervades material. 7 classes of experience, substance, quality, activity, generality. So he is interested in analyzing the impermanence of the real world as part of avidya, trying to understand what are these things, material, color, particular. He's explaining all these things. Democritus, who lived in 460 BCE, is called the father of modern medicine. He's known to have traveled to India, Asia, Ethiopia, returned to Greece with something called natural philosophy. He says creation is made up of atoms. Look at this over here, of different types that degenerate. He said there are 2 types of knowing. One is he called legitimate with intellect and illegitimate with sense objects. Does this sound like Vedanta to you? About the permanence and impermanence, about knowing with knowledge and knowing with sense objects. So he's internalized Vedanta knowledge and is introducing that over here. So it is amazing just to look at side by side the philosophies of these 2 people and show how a transference of Indian knowledge has come here. It is not that Indic knowledge, Greek knowledge has gone to India. Vedanta, Upanishadic knowledge has come here. It's very clear. One more example, the Ayurveda. In Ayurveda, we have Vata, Pitta, and Kapha, and all these kind of understandings of various properties like movement, cold, cohesion, transformation, fire, water, earth, and so on. Hippocrates, he introduced this as a medicine in West, basically on hot, dry, cold, wet, phlegm, blood, air, yellow bile, fire, and so on. Exactly the same as the Ayurvedic model. He had inherited that over there. How did he know it? Hippocrates was a student of Democritus. And who is Democritus? Is this gentleman. Do you see the connection? So he was a student of Democritus. In addition to that, Buddhists were transmitting a lot of knowledge between 5th century to 4th century BCE, contacts with Alexander, and also Alexander had ordered the translation of works of Aristotle. All these things helped them to take Indian knowledge over to Greece, whether it is in medicine or mathematics. There is a whole lot of things. Read my paper and I'll given a lot of details over there. After Alexander also, a lot of knowledge transfers, don't want to spend time there. Hipparchus and trigonometry. Today there is people who are going around saying Hipparchus is the one who invented trigonometry and Aryabhatta learned his trigonometry from Hipparchus. This is the way the Pingree and others have been talking about. But if you see what he was doing, Hipparchus, and if you see what another very famous Rishi called Pingala, this is a Western timeline, 400 BCE, in Chanda Shastra, what he did in combinatorics, binomials, what Vriddhi Garga did, and all those things, you see the exact things were told by him later on. So it's very clear that ideas of combinatorics, especially from Pingala, was copied by Hipparchus in this enumerator combinatorics. And he proposed something called propositional logic, and he invented this Stoicism. Stoicism is an offshoot of Plato, which is rooted in ideas of Brahman. The ideas of Brahman, oneness, the one, everything was Vedanta that was carried over to the early Greek religions. It's very, very clear over here. I'll skip this. Eratosthenes. Eratosthenes was a mathematician, astronomer, geographer, and his main job was chief librarian at Alexandria. The Alexandria Library was set up in Egypt, in this place, Alexandria, and its job was to take texts from the East and send it off to the West. So whenever any ship used to berth in their lands, the pharaoh or the king over there would ask the ship owners to they'll confiscate all their books. Their books will be taken, they'd be allowed to take copies, but the original was kept in Alexandria. And he was a chief librarian there. So he had a lot of time to read Indic texts and such things. So he worked on circumference of Earth, tilt of Earth's axis, and all these things. What he did here is very similar to what Shatapatha Brahmana had done. If you remember my yesterday's talk, I said that Yajnavalkya talked about the distance from earth to sun, earth to moon as a function of the diameters, 108 times the diameter. Guess what? He started saying the same thing. Distance from earth to sun, diameter at 27 times earth dimensions. Actual one is slightly different from that. So he's a lot of interesting things that he said were copies of what earlier Indians had already said. We talked about knowledge transfer by the Muslims, so I won't repeat this. So, like I said, Al-Biruni and others, a lot of works have been copied. We talked about transmission to Europe, so won't go into detail over here. Here are some examples of knowledge transmissions directly. In 1200s or 1300s, Marco Polo was one of the visitors at that time, and this John, who was a missionary in Mylapore, Jordanus Catalani came to Kollam in Kerala. All these people copied works and took, and here is a book that talks about some of them. 1400s, Niccolo di Conti, who came to Vijayanagar, Mylapore, Koilan, and so on. And Alfonsi Nikitin, Vasco da Gama, a whole lot of people, and their accounts are over here who took knowledge. 1500s, we know from Vasco da Gama and a whole lot of people. Along with Vasco da Gama, many of the Portuguese who came to India were also scientists. For example, over here, Pedro Nunes, Jordi Castro, who was the fourth viceroy to India, they sent their scientists also to India. They copied knowledge in botany and medicine and other things and took them to Portugal. So in Lisbon, there is a statue that shows all the thinkers of their society, and they're all looking to the sea, because that is where they got their knowledge from India. So even today, if you go to Lisbon, you'll see this statue over there. So I'm come to the last part of my talk. So this is the European plagiarism and Renaissance. So what happened in Europe, like I told you, was after they adopted Christianity, they fell into Dark Ages. Dark Ages persisted until about 1400 current era. It was a time when there was illiteracy, there was poverty, there was disease, and the church was very strong in controlling their mind and keeping them where they are. The church was the most powerful institution that kept them down. So that was a time when Europe was slowly taking knowledge from India through the translation school in Spain, learning works, and so on. In 1498 or so, the Christian part of Europe finally got rid of the Muslims from Spain, and they liberated that and became fully Christian. They went through a period of Inquisition. Inquisition was a bloody event where they would kill anybody who was a Muslim or a Jew and those kind of things until they converted or said forgiveness and all those kind of things. Anybody who was found in possession of a Muslim work was seen as taking knowledge from Satan, and he was immediately killed, or his family would be killed, and these kinds of things. So most of the Renaissance scholars hid their sources and passed off Greek Indian works as their original knowledge. So you had the spectacle that Europe coming out of Dark Ages in 15th century, illiteracy, poverty, and other things, suddenly coming and saying, I invented this, I invented that, I invented this. And European, Eurocentric scholars go and say this is a flowering of European thought, but far be it from the truth. So basically it was Indic works that had helped them, and their own discovery of Greek works through the Muslims that helped them. So the ensuing European knowledge ignores citation to Indic sources, therefore I call them plagiarizing. So during the colonial period also, there was a gold rush by every colonial occupier. I'm not going into details of all of these things, but this is my final slide. So thank you for having the patience to sit and listen for so long. So if you remember, I started this talk by showing the mainstream narrative, and I said I'll provide evidence for a different narrative. I have struck off everything. We talked about Aryan invasion theory, we investigated archaeology, we investigated genetics, and we investigated antiquity of Indian civilization. We said, nope, it's out of India. It's clearly out of India theory. Indic thought, they said, impacted only the East. We showed it impacted the Greeks, the Babylonians, the Mitannis, everybody it's impacted. Indic civilization is recent. We have shown antiquity going back to 10,000 years before, 12,000 years before, and so on. Indic thought borrowed from the Greeks and Babylonians. It did not. It seeded the Greeks and Babylonians. Finally, they say Vedic culture is responsible for widespread poverty. We have shown that the British period and other things were responsible for the widespread poverty seen in India today. That is the end of my talk. Thank you very, very much for listening. Thank you. Thank you, Senator. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. So I'll be glad to take a few questions if you have them. Yes, sir. Can you speak into the microphone? Maybe they can give you a microphone.
Hello.
Please announce your name and affiliation, and you can.
Yeah, my name is Sri Hari. I'm also a Rotarian and social entrepreneur. I've heard, that India was the engine, like a locomotive, and rest were only bogies.
Right.
In your last slide, it looks like now going future. I mean, you have covered the history very well.
Mm-hmm.
Now we are in a crux or a very confused zone globally. Now, do you think that going forward, India will regain its position as the not as a last bogey or something like that, but the engine which can take till the maybe end of Kali Yuga? Because there are many other instances also. Avatars happened only in India, while other Diva Purushas were elsewhere. So this is a very hollowed place to come in, and whatever our karmic things
I
were there.
I got a question,
so
sir.
going forward, do you foresee that India will become
Excellent question.
which will take that Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam as a
Excellent question. So it is my firm belief that the philosophical systems of India is what allowed it to gain such a very high place in society a very long time ago. Our regard for the environment, our regard for life, and how we live life, and other such things that allowed us to be at this very high level from a long time ago. Now that we have gone through the invasion period and now we are under the clutches of the Marxists, our minds are under the clutches of the Marxists right now. If we can get away from that, I believe we have a chance to regain at least some of our Indic ways of thinking. Unfortunately, today, maybe 99.99% of the population is lost because the thinking is all deracinated. These are all deracinated people. They are people who have been removed from their culture, people who have been disconnected from the culture. Not one Indian can say, those are my ancestors, I identify with them. And what they're given is their gift and their ashirvad, I'm taking it. Not one person can have the legitimacy to say that. We are all deracinated and we are neither here nor there. We have some kind of a strange culture that is growing in India today and internalized by everybody thanks to education system, thanks to the media, thanks to the administration, thanks to the constitution, thanks to missionaries. All these vested interests have come in and have completely messed up our identity, who we are. So your question is, can we regain it? The only way to regain it is by getting a strong identity. Who are we as Indians? Who are we? There are people trying to tell you through genetics who you are, that you came from outside, new civilization, knowledge came from outside. That is the model they want to put on you. However, the reality, evidence-based is completely different. Genetics is saying, no, it is from India that it went outside. And our knowledge systems are saying, no, it is from us that everything went to the outside world. It's showing this is a very ancient civilization from very long time back. So this is the identity. If we are successful in regaining the narrative, I don't know how that will happen. I'm only a very, very small person over here trying to do these talks. If we succeed and make this widespread, everybody starts talking about these things, an evidence-based narrative, and forces our governments to listen to evidence rather than opinion, then perhaps the average Indian child will walk taller. Yes, this is who I am. Those are my ancestors. This is my philosophy. This is the way I will live life, and so on. If we can do that, yes, sir, definitely we can regain the lost ground. I certainly, honestly believe it can happen. Yes. Absolutely, Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam is an inborn thing in us, but at the same time, I also caution that we cannot offer Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam to somebody who does not believe in our philosophy. Our philosophy, it is a very true, sir. It's very true because we believe in Vedanta, we believe in Brahman, we believe no separation between creator and created. We believe the oneness of creation and everything that lives in this creation. Such a person who believes in this has got the potential to look and say, there is nothing to separate me and you except my ego. The ego is the one that is clouding my mind with avidya, and I cannot see that I'm the same as that person. So there is potential with realization that I can go to that state and say, Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam, the entire world is one family. It is possible. But a person who does not subscribe to this philosophy cannot realize the importance of what you're saying, because there is an us and them in Abrahamic philosophies. Everybody who believes that the only way to the Father is through the Son is saved. Everybody else is lost, eternal damnation. Everybody who believes in certain tenets of Islam and Muhammad is the last prophet, only they are saved by the grace of Allah. All the rest are eternal damnation. So philosophy that comes with us and them can never respect Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam, can never do that. So it will be suicidal for us to go and offer Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam to somebody who does not believe in it. And suicide is adharma. So we should not do that. So yes, sir, I think with if we can manage to reclaim the narrative, if we can show the world the value of dharma, the value of dharmic philosophies. Yesterday I showed a slide about how the world is degrading in environment everywhere. Only dharmic living has got the potential to save the world. I honestly and sincerely believe that we should all start converting people to Hinduism. We should go out there and say the failures of other philosophical systems to save the world for our future generations and show how Hinduism has got the potential to save the world. If we believe in it, I think you should go and propagate this. This is what even Krishna is asking you to do in Bhagavad Gita, final chapter of Bhagavad Gita. If you believe in it, please go and start converting people. Yes. Thank you.
I'm Jagannath.
Yes.
It's believed, the name Kashmir, it's originated since the sage Kashyapa lived in there.
Right.
Do you agree with that? If so, what can you just throw light on what period it was?
So I'm not an expert in the genealogy of Kashmir. Professor Subhash Kak has written extensively on this. He's a Kashmiri. I greatly respect Professor Subhash Kak's findings. So please look up Subhash Kak. And he also says it derives a name from Kashyapa.
That's what.
And Kashyapa is one of the Saptarishis.
Correct,
He's immortalized as Saptarishi. So and hinting great antiquity, very great antiquity. So, but I myself have not done enough research to give you a good answer. So please look up Professor Subhash Kak.
So one more question.
Yes.
I mean, if we believe that, actually, Surya, sun god, is the son of Kashyapa. So before he was born, who was there? So Kashyapa must be earlier that, no? So it must be very, very long, no? Millions and millions of years.
Well,
I mean, if you believe.
Well, the question is you're taking a literal reading of a Puranic story and you're trying to make sense out of it in today's world. It is not easy to look at text and take a trivial translation out of that. In fact, I have a TED talk out there, which the children know about over there, where I have tried to show many of the Puranic stories are encoding astronomical wisdom. If you read it merely as a story and as about a divinity, you will not get the wisdom behind that story. There is some other wisdom over there, and you need the correct drishti to understand what is the correct story over there. So even here, you're attempting to get genealogy from certain stories over here. But there may be some other meaning that is intended to be communicated there. So one has got to investigate or ask a guru who knows these things very well. They might be able to give a better understanding of this particular issue.
Thank you.
I am a retired doctor, Jayashila Manur here. I live in Halgevadaralli area. I live in Halgevadaralli area. I have a practical question. How can we, as ordinary citizens, can force the governments to review and rewrite our school textbooks, not only in India, even in US and many others?
Very good question. So my group itself is involved in reviewing textbooks, and we have done that for one state in India as well as in Texas and USA. We have successfully changed some things, but not all. But as ordinary citizens and as parents, first thing you need to educate each other. Join the PTA of your schools. If there's a PTA, join the PTA. First, you read and get educated on the facts. Look at what the children are learning, compile it down. Use talks like this, books by other researchers that have written, get the facts down, and go to the PTA and ask the principal and others, force them to agree that there's a problem, get the signatures of the principals, and start making representations to NCERT, the state textbook committee, CBSE textbook committee. Once they see a groundswell of opinion, things can change. About 20 years ago, we might feel helpless. But today, sir, you are empowered. Social media has made you as powerful as any newspaper. So get out there on Twitter, on Facebook, on any other social media, and start projecting your views. Everybody show your opinion, base it on facts. Don't get discredited by playing up some wrong things. Get the facts, evidence-based, and start protesting on that. In a democracy, I believe that's what we should do. We should put pressure on the elected officials by saying, here is the evidence. Why is my child learning rubbish? So we need to go there and demonstrate to them that things have to change. I think once there is sufficient critical mass, things will change. My understanding is there is desire for change, but the Marxists are controlling the education sphere right now. That is the problem. So once this government finds the courage to get them out of power, I think things can change.
My name is Aarti, and I'm a teacher in Prakriya. Basically, what I'm doing at the moment is trying to address a lot of these problems in the history book by trying to rewrite them, doing my own research, and presenting an alternative narrative to the children, as against the narratives the single narratives that they are coming up with in the books, which means a lot of research. It's quite challenging because the ICSE board, you have to cater to that as well, and over and above that, you have to kind of make your own thing, put in debates and stuff, but in a way just to put a question in their mind.
Right.
And not to take whatever is in there as the truth. My question, so a lot of these facts were very, very useful for me.
Wonderful.
I'm also looking at another part of the southern India, which there is a lot about the north, but we don't seem to cover the south as much in detail. I would like to know if you have done any research